Hello everyone, Logan Albright here, back again with more content for you. And today I want to talk about something a little bit different. I want to talk about tarot cards. And I know I usually do book reviews on this channel, but I'm not going to let you down. We are going to do some book reviews. I'm going to talk about some books that will help you get into tarot if it's something you're interested in doing. And I'll talk about some deck recommendations as well. But I first want to start off by just explaining what the tarot is and kind of the history of it. It's something that I've been interested in for a long time. I got my first tarot deck maybe 10 years ago, but I've only really started studying it in depth in the last 1 or 2 years. And it's something that you can really devote a lifetime of study to. You can go as shallow or as deep as you want to with it. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it. But it's a really interesting subject, and so let's talk about it. First of all, what is the tarot? Well, the tarot is a divination method using cards, and they use a pack of 78 cards known as a tarot deck. And it's similar, it shares roots with our modern playing cards, but there's a few important differences, which I'll get into in a minute. There's a lot of mythology surrounding the origin of tarot. Some people say it dates back to ancient Egypt and has mystical roots dating back thousands of years. There's not really any evidence to support that. It appears to derive from cards that were popularized in Renaissance Italy, and they were used for gambling and used for playing. But over the time, they became used for more esoteric purposes. They became used for fortune telling and for divination and for kind of meditation and any kind of occult insight you want to get. So as the tarot began to develop in popularity and began to be used for different things, it diverged from what we know as modern playing cards. And while the modern playing cards just have the 1 through 10 of every suit, and then the court cards, the king, queen, and jack, the tarot cards also have 1 through 10 of every suit, although the suits are different. The suits are wands, cups, swords, and pentacles, or discs, or coins. Different packs call them different things. And the court cards, instead of having 3 in each suit, there's 4 in each suit. And these differ a little depending on the deck you get. They're either going to be king, queen, knight, page, king, queen, prince, princess, knight, king, queen, princess, something along those lines. It doesn't matter too much, but there's a certain significance to those cards, and they're going to be different depending on which deck you get. In addition to those cards, you also have what are called the major arcana, or the trump cards. And these were originally used in games of chance, and they were kind of laid out to tell a story, and they were kind of laid out in order of a hierarchy where they would trump each other. So you have the first card is the 0 card, which is called the Fool, which is the lowest one. And then as you go up, you get things like the Magician, the High Priestess, the Empress, the Emperor, the Hierophant, or the Pope, as it was originally called, and so on. And they trump each other as you go up in strength. But these cards began to take on very secret occult meanings. And when that started to happen was when you had a 19th century French occultist named Aleister Crowley. And he wrote a book called The Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic, which is a very interesting book. And he was the first one to kind of marry the tarot system to other systems of occult philosophy. He took a symbol called the Tree of Life, which comes from the Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a system of Jewish mysticism that is very popular in kind of Western esotericism, the Western mystery tradition. And he mapped all of the cards onto that tree and gave them associations. There are astrological associations, there's planetary associations, there's elemental associations, there's associations with the Hebrew alphabet. It all goes very deep, and you can go as deep into it as you want to. But it's very interesting, and like I said, you can study this your whole life and still have work to do. But this is just a beginner's guide, so we'll get into it a little bit more. And so what happened after Levi did that was there was a 19th century mystical order in England called the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. And they took the tarot and made it kind of a staple of their philosophy. And they redesigned the deck, and they made it... they imbued great symbolism into all the cards, and they took the small cards, which were traditionally just numbered 1 through 10 with just numbers on them or just pips on them, and they started to design those cards and give them their own pictorial significance as well. So you end up with these very beautiful, elaborate decks that have lots of interesting pictures on them that can be very evocative and useful in helping you to interpret the cards. And the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn took this deck and used it in secret and used their own designs and their own mystical significance to it, and developed it into a very comprehensive system of meditation and divination and all those things. And those designs have been reproduced and copied in the modern era in this deck, which is called the Golden Dawn Tarot. It's designed by Robert Wang, and it is kind of the most faithful representation of those original cards, although it is not the most popular deck because it came out considerably later. What happened was the occultist Arthur Edward Waite, who was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, designed a deck for public consumption, and he designed it with the illustrator Pamela Coleman Smith, and he published it through Rider Publications, and that became known as the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, which is now often called the Rider-Waite-Smith deck to give honor to the illustrator very appropriately, I think. And this is what it looks like. You've probably seen it. It is the most popular deck far and away. It's what all the beginners start with. It is the one you will see if you see tarot depicted in media, in movies and television and things of that nature. And it's a great place to start. I have a few issues with it, which I'll get into, but let me show you some of the cards and you can see what they're like. So these are the cards from the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, very elaborately designed by Pamela Coleman Smith. And as you can see, all of the small cards, the little ones, the swords and the wands and the cups and the pentacles, all have their own unique illustrations, which is great. I find them very evocative. The problem with the deck is that Waite was very secretive. He swore all these oaths of secrecy when he was in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and he didn't want to violate them. So there's a lot of kind of blinds and ambiguities and misattributions in these cards that he put in order to try to avoid giving away the secrets of his order. That can be kind of frustrating, but I think the illustrations on the card have a lot of insight into the meanings of the cards, and they can be very useful on their own. Any pack you buy will come with a little booklet like this telling you how to use the cards and what the cards mean. These are a pretty limited utility. I really think if you were going to buy a deck, you should get a supplemental text to learn more about the cards and what they mean. And one of the options you can do is the original text that Waite wrote, which is called The Pictorial Key to the Tarot. Here is the official publication of it, and this has his complete explanation of the meaning of the cards. Like I said, there's a lot of misinformation in here, so I don't love it. It's not my favorite, and also there's a lot of kind of superficial fortune-telling aspects to it. Like he talks about, you know, the kind of people you're going to meet, their hair color and eye color and stuff like that, which is not very esoterically interesting to me. Nevertheless, it's probably the easiest to understand book to start out with, and it's very similar to the book that comes in the pack of cards, but it's a lot more detailed. If you decide you want to start with the Pamela Coleman Smith, the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot cards, which you have every reason to do because they're the most popular, and you can talk to your friends about it, and you can, you know, reference what you see in movies and things like that. Instead of starting with that Waite book, I would recommend this book, which is the complete guide to the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, published by Llewellyn Publications, and it's by Sasha Graham. It's a fantastic, thick, chunky book that goes through not only all the meanings of the cards and how to divine with them, but it also gives you all the history you need, a lot of the esoteric significance, all the astrological associations, tells you about the Tree of Life and all those things. Very useful and a really fantastic book. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's the best single work on the tarot I think I've read. Although it is specific to this deck, but most of the modern decks that you will see are derived from this deck or some version of it, so it's pretty applicable to every deck you want to use. There's a few little mistakes in it, a few little things I have a quibble with, but as a beginner, they're not going to bother you and you're not going to get hung up on them, so I wouldn't worry about it. This is a great reference work. Now, as you go beyond the surface level meanings of the cards, there's a lot to consider. There's all these attributions that are attributed to the cards. Like I mentioned, they're attributed to this Tree of Life and how all these astrological signs and elemental signs and things like that. And it takes a lot of work to kind of understand those, but it's very rewarding. The more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of the cards. And if you want to delve into that, you're going to need a little bit more of a resource to get into those sort of things. One way to do that is to go back to the kind of original designs of the Golden Dawn in the Golden Dawn Tarot deck designed by Robert Wang, which I mentioned earlier. And here's a few of the cards from that deck and what they look like. The illustrations are quite striking. They're a little bit different. One of the things you'll notice is the small cards are much less elaborately illustrated than the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. They're much more similar to pips, although there are some differences. You'll see the different suits there, the swords, the wands, and then of course the trump cards are very elaborately illustrated. And what you can start to do with a deck like this is really get into some of the more esoteric attributions of the cards. So for example, the suits all have attributions. The suits are important. They're not just, you know, to differentiate from each other. They all have their own meanings. So for example, the wands represent the element of fire, and fire in turn corresponds to the human will. So all of the wand cards are going to have something to do with the will, and that helps you kind of decode them a little bit. The cup cards have something to do with the emotions or relationships, kind of more matters of the heart. The sword cards have to do with the intellect, and the pentacle or coin or disc cards have to do with the material world, matters of money and health and kind of, you know, everyday modern world type things. And that helps you decode them. On the other hand, you have the numerical significance of every card. Every card has a number. All the small cards have numbers on them. Those numbers 1 through 10 correspond to what are called the Sephiroth, or the emanations on the Tree of Life. This is too big of a subject for me to really get into, but the Tree of Life is a diagram that kind of shows the structure and creation of the universe, as well as the structure and creation of the human consciousness. And so you can know something about the card based on the number and what sephira it corresponds to on the Tree of Life. So for example, I'll give an example here. This is the Five of Wands. It has 5 wands on there, as you can see. We just said the wands correspond to the will and correspond to fire. It's an energetic card. The 5 is sort of a negative association, because the 5th sephira on the Tree of Life is sort of a violent one. It's a little bit, overly energetic. It's a little bit hostile. It's force without the moderating influence of like mercy. So the 5s all tend to have kind of a violent connotation. So when you have the fiery will in the 5th sephira, this card is called the Lord of Strife. And all the cards have titles like that, and you have to know what they are. But you can know based on the suit and based on the number, you already get an idea of what's going to be going on there. The Lord of Strife, you're going to have conflict because you have something violent and fiery like the will in a violent and fiery sephira, number 5. On the other hand, if you go to the next card in the deck, the 6 of Wands, it's much more balanced in its position on the Tree of Life. And so you get a much more equilibrated version of the will. And the 6 is always one of the most positive ones in the deck. And the 6 of Wands is called the Lord of Victory, a much better outcome for the will than strife. Strife, when it's properly balanced with everything else, leads to victory. You also have planetary and astrological associations with these cards too, which if you're into astrology, you can get into a lot with that and really understand how those correspondences will give you a clue to the meaning of the cards. Then you have the court cards, and the court cards are some of the most difficult ones to interpret, but they also have elemental attributions. You have the knights, which are attributed to fire, and you have the queens, which are attributed to water. You have the kings or the princes, which are attributed to air, and then you have the pages or the princesses, which are attributed to earth. And so when you have something like the Knight of Wands, you have those 2 elements. The wands give you the will, they give you the fire, and also the knight gives you fire. So the Knight of Wands is fire of fire. It's a very active card, as you may imagine. Whereas you have something like the Queen of Swords, you have swords represent air, Queen represents water, so the Queen of Swords is the water of air. And you can kind of draw inferences from that as well. Then, of course, you have the trump cards, the major arcana, and those are also a little bit more complicated to interpret. They all have lots of their own attributions as well, and it's important to go beyond just the surface level of the card. Like, for example, the 6th card is called the Lovers, and so it's easy to just interpret that as, oh, you're going to have love in your life, as kind of a surface level fortune-telling sort of attribution. But really it corresponds with kind of a duality. It corresponds with the zodiac sign Gemini, which is the twins, and so you really have a two-ness here, not just of lovers, but of partners, of siblings, of any kind of duality can be represented in that card, in addition to lots of other attributions as well. The book that Robert Wang wrote to go with his deck is called the Qabalistic Tarot. Here it is. It is published by the US Games Limited, which is the company that also publishes the cards themselves. And this is a great book. It doesn't really have a ton of like divinatory or fortune-telling information in it, but it goes into great detail about the Kabbalah, the Tree of Life. This is a diagram of the Tree of Life in kind of 3 dimensions on the cover here. And it really gives you great insight into the cards. So as like a secondary text, once you kind of get some of the basics down, this is really good to give you further understanding of the cards. Now, as frequent viewers of my channel will know, I've talked a lot about the magician Aleister Crowley before, and he is sort of one of the most brilliant minds of the occult scene in the 20th century. And he wrote a lot of interesting stuff, and he, of course, designed his own tarot deck and his own system of tarot. And it's based on everything that came before, but it's a little bit different because he was certainly a nonconformist, and he did some things differently. One of the main differences between Crowley's deck and everyone else's deck is that he had this revelation. He had this book that he claims was dictated to him by a supernatural entity while he was meditating, called the Book of the Law. And in that book, they describe the passing of the old eon into a new one. It's like that Age of Aquarius thing you always hear about, right? Like we're going into a new phase of human existence. And so he argued that some of the old cards were outdated and that we needed to update them for the new eon. And that was the inspiration behind his deck here called the Thoth Tarot. I call it Thoth. You can pronounce it Thoth. I know people in my comments give me a hard time for saying Crowley instead of Crowley, which is apparently how he pronounced his name. But you know what? I can pronounce pronounce words the way I want to pronounce them. And I'm American and he was English. I have a different accent than he had. So I choose to say Crowley because I like it better. So don't give me a hard time about that. Don't post in the comments about how I'm pronouncing his name wrong. I know how he wanted me to pronounce it, and I don't care. I'm going to keep saying Crowley. And I'm going to keep saying Thoth because to me that seems like the correct pronunciation. The cards that he produced are very beautifully painted. They have full color illustrations of all the cards, including the small cards. They have a very kind of Art Deco feel. These were done like in the 1930s, and you can really feel that. Really flowing, gorgeous cards. All the correct symbolism is here. I really think it's a beautiful deck and very good. The problem with it, in my eyes, is that he made a few changes, like I mentioned, because of his whole New Eon thing. He changed some of the titles of the cards, and he changed some of the numbering of the cards. Some of those changes I love. Some of those changes I don't like so much. So it just depends on what your preference is and what you like. For example, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's important. In the original Italian design of the deck, the trump card number 8 was called Justice, and the trump card number 11 was called Strength. When Eliphas Levi did his layout on the Tree of Life, he noticed that there was a problem, and that the 8th card was supposed to be attributed to the zodiac sign Leo, the lion, which is a very strong, sunny sign, and the 11th card was supposed to be attributed to the sign Libra, which is the scales of justice, right? And so it didn't really make sense to have that attribution. So he decided to swap those two. The card Strength has a lion painted on it for one thing, so it goes well with Leo, and the term Strength goes well with Leo, whereas the card Justice goes much better with Libra, the scales of justice. So those two were swapped and those numbers were changed. So now the 8th trump is Strength and the 11th trump is Justice. And in almost all modern decks, you will find that change made. In Crowley's deck, he actually reverses that change. He keeps the zodiac attribution, but he retains the original numbering of those two cards. He also changes the name of those cards to Lust and Adjustment instead of Strength and Justice. He also changes the star card with the Emperor. It was revealed to him in his book, the Book of the Law, that those attributions were wrong, and so he swapped those two. I'm not as much of a fan of that one. I like the change of Justice and Strength around so that they fit with the zodiac signs. I don't so much like that other change, but that's one of the things he does differently. The book he wrote to accompany his deck is called the Book of Thoth. Here it is, published by Wiser Publications. It's a fantastic book on the tarot. It has a lot of really beautiful insights and really deep explanations of the cards and how they relate to all the various layers of symbolism on top of them. I really like it. The problem with it is that you really have to have a pretty solid background in esoteric philosophy in order to understand it at all. He talks a lot about Kabbalah, he talks a lot about astrology, and if you don't know about those things, you're going to be kind of lost in it. And while I think it's an incredible book, like I wouldn't recommend it to beginners unless you already know about that stuff. But there's a solution. Don't worry. Lon Milo Duquette, who is a very witty and clever and very knowledgeable occultist, wrote this book called Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot. And it's intended to kind of break it down for people who are just getting started. And he kind of gives you all that information you need packed up in little bite-sized morsels in the opening text. And then he goes on to explain all the cards and talk about the divinatory meanings and methods of divination. It's a very dense book. There's a ton of information packed in a very small amount of space, so it's difficult, it's challenging, but it's doable if you're determined and you are a beginner and you want to explore Crowley's version of the Thoth Tarot. He had his own religion that he founded called Thelema, and it's all based around those ideas. And so if you're interested in that kind of thing, this is a much better way to start. And while Duquette quotes liberally from the Book of Thoth in here, I really think you should have both of them because there's a lot of material in here that's not in here. And once you kind of get steeped in it well enough to where you feel like you're on solid ground, this is a great book to read as well. I recommend both of those very highly. If you want to do that angle on the tarot, there's lots of other ways to go. Speaking of other ways to go, we have this deck, which I really, really like, called the Hermetic Tarot. This is a black and white deck. When you maybe lose something with not having the colors. The colors are nice, but the illustrations are so great and so detailed. I'll show you a few of them here. They're just beautiful black and white, heavily detailed illustrations. And they really kind of give you a sense of all the symbolism you need. All the astrological symbols, the planetary symbols, all the alchemical symbols are all included on these cards, which was really helpful. And then the other thing that's helpful about these cards is that the titles of the cards are printed on the bottom here. So all the cards have titles, like I said. This is the Ten of Cups, which is the title of the Lord of Perfected Success. That's right on here. So if you don't want to memorize all 78 of them, then, this will help you out. The downside of that is that you tend to just kind of go by the title and don't really think about the symbolism too deeply. And you risk kind of giving these one-word interpretations of the card, which are not as, maybe not as helpful as they might otherwise be. But as a beginner and you're just starting out and you're having a trouble memorizing all the cards, it's a great crutch for that. And I do think it's a beautiful deck and very helpful. This was the first deck I got after my Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And I had had the Rider-Waite-Smith deck for a while and I wasn't really into it. I was having trouble connecting with it, and this one really got me to the next level because I found that I connected with these cards so much better and I like them so much more. So, you know, you really have to go with what you respond to and what you think works. I also want to add, there's lots of other decks out there that maybe are not strictly tarot decks. A tarot deck will always have 78 cards. If a deck has more or less than 78 cards, it's not a tarot deck. Those are called oracle decks. And there's nothing wrong with oracle decks. You can certainly use them if you find them helpful, but just know that they're not tarot decks and the symbolism is going to be different and the way you use them is going to be different. If you want to really learn about tarot, you have to get a deck that has 78 cards. That's very important. If none of those decks are too appealing to you, you can also go for a little bit more artistic and slightly less traditional deck. There's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of great, really talented illustrators making incredible decks. My favorite one that I've found so far, I think, is this Murder of Crows Tarot, which I really love. This is a special edition, limited edition version that has red, white, and black cards. I think the regular edition is just white and black, but the one I have is red. And the cards are so beautiful. They're very dark and gothic and kind of spooky. And if you're into that sort of thing, this is a beautiful deck for that. The symbolism is a little bit different than the other ones, but once you know what you're doing, this is totally fine. And, you know, there's so many options. You can get an original, like, Italian Renaissance tarot if you want to be really a traditionalist and go back to see what those original cards were like. Those are certainly available. You can do that. You can go a little further afield. I have a deck here that I recently got called the Wizard's Tarot. It was really psychedelic cards, and it's a little bit less traditional. They changed up some of the suits. You know, the traditional suits are wands, cups, swords, and pentacles. This one does some different things, but, you know, they're all correspond to one another. So once you know what you're doing, it's not really a problem, and whatever you respond to. There's also decks that are, you know, for children or for younger people. A lot of these decks have nudity in them, so if that bothers you, you might want to go for a more children's deck. I think it's quite beautiful, and, you know, it fits with the esoteric tradition which it's housed in, and it doesn't bother me at all. But, you know, if you want to, maybe a younger person and you want to learn tarot, there's certainly options there for whatever you want to get. I have this little tarot of pagan cats. It's just cat pictures, really cute, little pocket size, right? So there's just so many options of things you can do. Now, with regard to how the cards are used, there's, again, there's many different ways to do it. People will use it for fortune telling or for divination. You can just draw one card and infer what you will from that. A lot of people do a 3-card spread where you have one card representing past, one present, and one future. A very popular layout is called the Celtic Cross, and that's the one I tend to use. That's a 10-card spread, and that's described in a lot of the little booklets that you get with the decks. With the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, it's described in there, and it's available online. So if you're interested in that. And then there's a lot of other options too. In this book, The Complete Guide to the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, there's 100 different spreads you can use in the back. So they're all kind of arbitrary. It's the author's own creation. I'm not really a fan of them, but if you want to do something different, if you're not responding to any of the other ones, you have so many options, so many different ways you can do it. You just have to find what works for you best. Of course, Crowley had his own method of divination that he uses and describes in the Book of Thoth. I've actually never used it because it's incredibly elaborate and involved and time-consuming. It's just I don't have the patience for it, but if you really want to get deep into it, you can go down that road and do something very extreme with your tarot reading. So to sum up, if you just want to get into it, the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot is a perfectly fine place to start. Very common. Everyone else starts with it. You might as well too. But instead of getting Waite's book, I would really recommend this complete Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot book. It's so much better, and you'll learn so much more from it, even though it's a lot thicker and a lot more involved. If you want to go the Aleister Crowley route, start with understanding the Thoth Tarot, and then get the actual book from the master himself and learn about those. And I'll put the names of all these books in the description for you so you won't have to remember them. And then if you want to go the Golden Dawn route, the Qabalistic Tarot by Robert Wang is a great supplement in there. Even though it doesn't have a lot of divinatory advice, it really gives you insight into the cards. Very highly recommended. And then pick a deck that just you respond to. It's easy to become a collector of tarot cards. There's so many options, so many beautiful decks to collect out there. It's really easy to get carried away. I've got like maybe 6 or 7 decks at this point, but I certainly want to get more. And you have to find the one that just connects with you emotionally. So there you go. That's my review. Very kind of headlong, you know, condensed review of the tarot. It's something you could spend your whole life studying, but I hope this was helpful to you guys. If you have any questions, please leave them for me in the comments and I'll be happy to respond. I try to respond to everybody who comments if I can. And then be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Let me know if you like this kind of content. I've been trying to decide what to do with this channel. Sometimes it's a little hard to keep up with the reading schedule to do a new book every week. So if you want me to do kind of more esoteric content, I've got a whole bookshelf of books back here I could talk about that I've read. I'd be happy to do that because it's an interest I've had for many years and something that continues to fascinate me. Until next time, though, I've been your host, Logan Albright, and I'll catch you later. Thanks so much for watching.